The top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. 11th hour talks intensify between Downing Street and Washington. It comes as the OBR tells MPs the tariffs will likely knock out all of Rachel Reeves' fiscal headroom. Utility bills, council tax, car tax, broadband and stamp duty all going up today in a blow to the nation's personal finances. Plus, the price of gold surges as investors search for a safe haven as Trump upends the global economy. Very good afternoon on this Tuesday. Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. The Office for Budget Responsibility has told MPs that Donald Trump's impending tariffs could knock out the UK government's fiscal headroom if they were maintained for 5 years. The warning comes just days after the Chancellor made sweeping cuts to the welfare state to pay for the higher costs of borrowing. Well, Professor David Miles, a member of the OBR, told MPs the most possible outcomes of US tariffs are likely to be, unsurprisingly, pretty negative.
If tariffs at 20-25% were put on the UK and maintained for 5 years, our assessment of what that does is that it will knock out all the headroom that the government currently has. So had we made that a central forecast and had the government not changed policy at all, knowing that we were going to take that as our central forecast, then the headroom would have pretty much all gone.
Well, let's get more on this with Paul Andras, who is Professor of Economics at Harvard University. Very good afternoon to you. And I suppose the big question is, we're all trying to work out what these tariffs may well look like.
Absolutely. There's still a lot of uncertainty. We're less than 24 hours from the actual announcement, and it's still not very clear what we're actually going to get from President Trump.
What is your best guess? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but if you had to suggest what we may well be looking at, what do you think?
I do think he's very likely to announce a fairly homogeneous tariff, maybe a 20% tariff applying to all goods and all countries, at least in the short run. I think he's going to feel like that's what he needs to do. I don't think that's going to be the end of the uncertainty. I think in the days after that, there's going to be a lot of demands for carve-outs and the like. And I do think that we're going to have to wait a few days to figure out exactly where the tariffs are actually going to apply. But in the short run, I think the announcement is likely to be pretty simple, homogeneous policy.
Yeah, so someone was saying that he just wants to make a big thing of this. I mean, he's called it Liberation Day, hasn't he? And ultimately, that's why there are no exemptions. He wants this to have some kind of global heft to it, if you like.
Well, he is the tariff man, right? So I think he feels like the pressure to deliver on what he had promised. And again, I think he probably knows it already that there's going to be, if he were to go through with this, there would be a lot of disruptions to the U.S. economy, and he's likely to kind of cave to some of the demands that are going to be coming over the next few days or weeks.
And on that, how much is this about, Donald Trump, the man who likes to make a deal, and how much do you reckon this is about Donald Trump, the ideologue, who, to be fair to him, has been pretty consistent about tariffs for decades, way before he even got involved in politics?
Yeah, I think the debate about whether he was just trying to negotiate better terms for the U.S. or he was actually keen to kind of implement tariffs, that's a debate we had about 8 years ago. And I think many of us thought initially he was just sort of trying to negotiate with a strong stance. I'm less sure these days. I do think that on the one hand, on the geopolitical situation, I think he's quite serious about the desire, this imperialist desires. And on the economic front, I do think that he has this old-fashioned mentality that tariffs might well be a valid instrument to try to bring manufacturing back to an advanced economy like the U.S. I do think that he's sort of that's something he does believe. I think he's wrong, but I do think he might believe that.
Yeah, just on that point, why do you think he's wrong? He's held this position for a long time, but it will lead to higher inflation, won't it? Are you also not convinced that it will lead to the return of a massive industrial base in the US?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly right. I think that a short-run increase in prices is something that very few people would debate, and I think the administration itself has warned that there could be a short-run pain. I think where he might be wrong is in this sort of idea that tariffs are something that allow domestic producers to better compete against foreign firms. I think that's a mentality that might have been valid maybe 40, 50 years ago. But in a modern economy of global value chains, where firms are not just producing goods using local labor or local factors of production, but they're actually engaged in these global production chains where they're importing lots of parts and components that they need to produce the cars or to produce other manufacturing goods. When you start putting tariffs in this global value chains, that leads to massive disruptions. So where the dust is going to settle, I think, is much, much less clear in this modern world of global value chain than in a more traditional world that he might have in mind. And that's precisely why I'm saying there's going to be a lot of demands from automakers and other producers to kind of carve out this and that to make sure that the goals of the administration are in line with the policies they implement.
And just very finally on this, while you've been talking about those supply chains, we've been watching pictures of cars and cargo ships. Just on a big macro level, we're here in the UK, in Europe. Is this a blip to globalization, to global trade as we know it, given the fact that President Trump won't be there forever, even though sometimes you get the impression he'd quite like it? Or is this a big change in terms of globalization? Are we seeing what might be a generational change here?
I do think there's the potential for a big change. I mean, it's very, very tempting to associate what's happened in the last few weeks or even years to idiosyncratic factors. This politician or businessman, President Trump, that became president and went through with this. But obviously, you know, the U.S. is a democracy. He was elected. That tells me that there's a lot of demand for the policies that he put in place and he's likely to put in place. I don't think, you know, Trump might go away. We might have a different president in a few years, but the sentiment, the demand from the people is not going to go away. I mean, we could sort of go into the details about what is actually driving all this, but certainly the demand for protection is much more widespread than coming from the ideas of a single individual.
OK, really appreciate your time. Paul Antras there from Harvard University on those Trump tariffs. Thank you very much indeed. And you'll be able to see on the side of your screen there that we're expecting to hear from the White House a news conference briefing at around 5 p.m. this afternoon. Do stay tuned for that. Now, we're actually going to talk about Mexico and the impact that it may well have there, because it's not just a risk, of course, to the UK, but also to other parts of the world, including the southern border country, US, with Mexico. It's already estimated by economists to be headed for recession even before the imposition of these tariffs. So what will President Trump's tariff policy mean for the Mexican economy? Well, I'd like to say we can speak to Alex Gonzalez Ormoritz, who is a publisher at the Mexico Political Economist and joined us live from Mexico City. Very good afternoon to you, Alex. First of all, just give us a sense of how intertwined, if you like, the US and Mexican economy actually are.
Completely intertwined. We can't talk about the American economy at this point without talking about the Mexican economy. There are states that are almost completely dependent on their Mexican partners for imports and exports. Texas, its whole economy, one of the biggest economies in the world, and California depend enormously on Mexico. They're both their number one partners.
They are indeed, and that is why, of course, tariffs will have a big impact. Well, what's the mood like there? I mean, here in the UK, we constantly think our government might be able to cut a deal with Donald Trump. What's the sense of how Mexico is dealing with Donald Trump 10 weeks in to his second term?
One thing you've got to understand is that although the Canadians and the Europeans have been caught off guard by American intransigence and aggressiveness, Mexico is actually quite used to this. So the approach has been calm, collected, and coordinated. Mexico has a long history of wrangling with this giant to its north. And so the strategy seems to have been working so far. There is a lot of work towards what Donald Trump wants, but also a lot of work towards defending Mexico's own economy by bolstering domestic consumption and by diversifying our trade partners.
Well, isn't that the interesting point, I suppose, Alex? You know, you talk about this is not new for Mexico, and that clearly is the case. But at the same time, Mexico doesn't seem to have moved away from its reliance, if you like, on the United States. Or is that me just saying that because obviously when you've got the world's biggest and wealthiest economy literally on your doorstep, it's difficult to move away from that reliance?
You're absolutely right on both fronts. On one side, yes, of course, it's very beneficial to have the world's greatest economy next to you, but it's also ridiculous that we willingly gave over our economic sovereignty for a couple of bucks because we didn't even gain all that much or all that was promised from NAFTA and then the USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. And this is basically an ideological position. For 30 years, the people who are in government in this country control the narrative saying if we completely give in to the United States, we'll be rich. We've had neither. We have no security. We have not become rich. And really, ultimately, this trade agreement that we've had over the past 30 years has had a lot of wins, but also lots and lots of losses for agricultural workers and lots of different industries across Mexico that were completely undermined by the United States.
And just very finally, Alex, we've seen a kind of resurgence of kind of Canadian nationalism or nationhoods given what's happening with Donald Trump and some of the things he said. Now, he's been more antagonistic towards Canada than he has Mexico. What's the political mood like there towards the United States?
Quite a lot of tranquility, to be honest. Even the Mexican peso, which is notoriously volatile, has held its ground because there's an expectation that Mexico does actually have leverage with the United States. The United States needs us because as opposed to China, which is undermining American goods, Mexico is complementary to American goods. American goods are competitive on the world stage because Mexico makes that so. It's not because we're undercutting their costs, we're making them competitive. They keep most of the value and we add a little bit more for cheaper and with a lot of skill to make that American economy boom. And we've seen it over the past few months. So ultimately, there's a sort of quiet confidence in Mexico that we'll be fine because we do have quite a bit of leverage.
OK, Alex, really fascinating stuff. Live there in Mexico City and Mexico, along with the UK and the rest of us, all awaiting, of course, what we will hear from Donald Trump tomorrow. We believe tomorrow evening UK time. And we will have full coverage here on Sky News of the lead up to that and then the fallout over the next couple of days. Let's move on, though, to what's been branded as terrible Tuesday or awful April, because it's Brits up and down the country, you and I, all been hit with several simultaneous bill increases. In fact, on average, households will see their bills increase by around £448. That's tax rises, utility bills, and even broadband services going up. Well, to break it all down, let's speak to Rachel Harris, founder of Accountant She. Rachel, good afternoon to you. It does kind of feel like terrible Tuesday, doesn't it? I mean, we're talking here about a whole range of different bills, council tax, broadband, and they're all going up on the one day.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we are seeing council tax, energy bills, water bills, broadband, TV licenses, road tax, electric vehicles, and a lot of this is stemming from the national insurance raises that Labour brought in October that actually come into play for April 2025. So lots of businesses have seen employers' national insurance increase from 13.8% to 15%, so 1.2% increase, as well as the threshold that employers actually have to pay that decreasing at the same time.
And Rachel, we've kind of tried to sum it all up by saying on average it's going to be about £448 if you're the average person, but it is going to hit some people harder than others, and it does depend what you've got, what you use, and where you are.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this increase specifically is going to hit labour-heavy sectors the hardest. So you should expect to see the biggest increases in the retail sector, the service-based sector, hospitality and care. So I employ 20 people. I'm a service-based business owner. Our payroll bill is £500,000 every year. And on the 1st of April, we've seen a £30,000 increase in the cost of employing those staff in the UK.
Wow, that is a lot of money. And that's the problem, isn't it? That while big companies say they can absorb these costs, including the increase in the minimum wage today, which the Prime Minister's been trumpeting, that for those smaller and medium-sized businesses, it's a big increase in costs that some might not be able to afford.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this isn't really about budgeting anymore. I feel like as a business owner, this is about being squeezed in lots of different directions. And so we are seeing lots of quiet closures of small and independent businesses that we all love, with cancelled direct debits for lots of business owners. And so for us, we've actually just had to increase our fees by 7% in order to keep up to date with this. And we've actually advised and taught all of our clients exactly how to do the same.
And just very finally, the problem is, and we've just been talking about this on the programme, haven't we, Rachel, about these tariffs. We've just heard from the OBR saying that they could wipe out, if you like, Rachel Reeves's headroom, her wriggle room. And the thought process is, if things get bad, we may well see taxes have to go up again.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I feel like we're all going to be eagerly watching the US tomorrow to see how, again, they're our neighbours in every sense of the word. And so if you are a Brit and you're struggling, I would keep your eyes peeled on Donald's announcement tomorrow. Indeed,
and we will. Rachel, appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you very much, Rachel Harris there. Just going to bring you some breaking news coming from the Competition and Markets Authority, and that is that 10 car makers and 2 industry groups have been fined almost £78 million for colluding to restrict competition over vehicle recycling. As I say, this is coming from the Competition and Markets Authority. They've issued a statement this afternoon saying that it has reached a settlement with the CMA, this is the car manufacturers and industry bodies, after essentially admitting that they did break competition law. 10 manufacturers include everyone from BMW, Ford, Jaguar Land Rover, Peugeot, Citroën, Mitsubishi, Nissan, Renault, Toyota, Vauxhall and Volkswagen, and 2 trade bodies have been fined some £78 million. And this is about them deciding not to compete against one another when advertising what percentage of the cars can be recycled. And so the CMA has stepped in and fined them some £78 million. OK, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up next, we'll be looking at how the markets are doing today. FTSE up actually a little. Been a bit of a rollercoaster ride over the last couple of weeks. We'll have all the details on that and why gold is also soaring after this quick break. Do stay tuned.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry. It is an anti-woman agenda.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Anybody else?
Should the Defence Secretary and the Vice...
Wait, what country are you
from? The UK?
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Sky News, get the full story first. Free wherever you get your news. Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her.
Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
1,500 movies. I don't want this flight to end. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Very welcome back to Business Live. Let's look at how the markets are doing this afternoon. Let's speak to the global economist at Citi, Robert Socken, who is live for us in New York. Very good afternoon to you, Robert. First of all, let's talk about the US stock market. It's been up and down like a yo-yo over the last couple of months, given all the uncertainty, not least of all about tariffs. And we can probably expect some of that again this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everyone, economists, strategists, investors, are waiting to see what the administration does with tariffs on April 2nd. That's been kind of the marker that's put down for a large tariff announcement. And there's a wide range of risks around it. You know, it could come out on the more mild side of expectations, which I would define as Trump making announcements on reciprocal tariffs, defined traditionally, so just trying to match tariff rates that other countries have in negotiating. It could come up on the much higher end, you know, things like using the European VAT as a trade barrier and matching that with tariffs has been discussed. I don't think that's going to happen, but the key is there's a very wide range of risks around this event, and everyone's waiting to see what the administration ultimately does.
And what's the view there in New York? You know, Donald Trump's a New Yorker. He's talked for a long time about the markets and how much he viewed them as a gauge of America's economic success. And yet he seems to have changed in the last couple of months. They seem to matter less.
I think what we've seen is, you know, a focus on implementing tariff policy and a willingness, a much higher willingness to take the risks that means for the economy and the risk that means for the stock market than many, including us here at Citi, had expected. If you look back at Trump's first term, the stock market and the economy were kind of used as a gauge for Trump's performance. And he seems to be much more willing to take at least some short-term pain in order to implement what he thinks is the best strategy, which is these tariffs. Now, at the same time, I don't want to push that argument too far because I do still think that the administration pays close attention to the stock market and the economy. And if you start to see a lot of weakness in both going further into the year, that could be a reason they would stop and maybe turn back some of these policies.
And Robert, finally, just one thing that is going in one direction, and that is upwards. Gold, a record high today.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what you're seeing in gold is there's a lot of risk around the U.S. economy. There's a lot of geopolitical risk in the world. There's a lot of policy uncertainty, and gold tends to do very well in that type of environment. And so I think, at least in the short term, that is likely to be here to stay. We are in a world of maximum policy uncertainty. And I would imagine, at least for the next several weeks, if not months, that is to continue. So gold has performed very well in that environment. If that policy uncertainty comes off, and the U.S. economy continues to perform like it did over the last few years, I would expect some of that momentum in gold to come off. But if that policy uncertainty ratchets even higher, you could see even more of a leg up in gold. So it really comes down to what is the policy environment? What is the uncertainty environment? That's what's really driving a lot of what we're seeing in gold.
OK, Rob, live for us there in New York this afternoon from Citi. Thank you very much indeed. OK, that's it from me on Business Live for today. Back, of course, tomorrow morning at 11:30. Up next, it's the News Hour with Mark Austin. Stay tuned for that. I'll see you tomorrow.